The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, crystal shattering against marble as I stared at my own brushstrokes being sold for $330,000. Ashley stood beside the auctioneer, radiant in designer silk, accepting congratulations for her masterpiece, while I stood frozen in my server's uniform. 16 years I'd believed that painting was lost forever, destroyed in the basement flood that took everything else. But there it was, my signature carefully painted over with hers, my soul being sold to strangers, while my own daughter-in-law smiled like she'd created magic instead of committing the perfect crime. Comment your location and subscribe to stay connected. Time to dive into the story. Let me tell you how I ended up serving champagne at the very gallery where my stolen dreams were being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Because sometimes life has a twisted sense of humor, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to find your backbone again. 3 months earlier, I'd been Margaret Thompson, 68 years old and invisible to everyone except bill collectors and grocery store clerks who barely glanced up when I counted exact change. My husband Robert had been dead for 8 years, leaving me with a mortgage I couldn't afford and memories that didn't pay rent. My son David visited twice a year with his wife Ashley, just long enough to remind me how disappointed they were in my choices. "Mom, you could have been somebody," David would say, glancing around my cluttered apartment with that particular expression children reserve for parents who've failed to live up to their potential. All that talent just wasted. He wasn't wrong about the talent part. Once upon a time, Margaret Thompson had been Maggie Hartwell, the girl who painted landscapes so real you could smell the wildflowers and feel the morning mist. I'd won a scholarship to the Chicago Art Institute, had a gallery interested in my work, had dreams bigger than the small Kansas town where I grew up. Then Robert happened. Sweet, steady Robert with his accounting degree and sensible life plan. Marriage at 22, David at 24, and suddenly art became something I did when I had time. The studio became a guest room. The easel got moved to the garage, and eventually the brushes got packed away in boxes marked someday. After Robert died, I'd tried to find those boxes, tried to remember who I used to be, but someday had been buried under 8 years of grief and financial struggle. The basement flood 2 years ago had taken what was left of my artistic past. Canvases, brushes, even the photographs of my work, gone, or so I thought. When David mentioned that Ashley had gotten a job at the prestigious Whitmore Gallery downtown, I'd felt a flutter of something that might have been pride. At least one person in the family was making something of themselves in the art world, even if it was just selling other people's dreams. "Ashley's doing really well," David had said during his last visit. "She's got such an eye for talent. Eleanor Price thinks she has real potential as a curator." I'd smiled and nodded, playing the supportive mother-in-law role I'd perfected over the years. What else was I going to say? That watching someone else live the life I'd given up made my chest feel like it was filled with broken glass? When Eleanor Price called me personally to offer a job serving at gallery events, I'd been too surprised to say no. "Ashley had recommended me," she said. "Thought I might enjoy being around art again." "It's not much," Eleanor had explained in her crisp, cultured voice. "Just serving champagne and canapes at openings and auctions. But Ashley mentioned you had an artistic background, and I prefer staff who appreciate what we're displaying." The pay was decent. And honestly, I needed the money. Social Security barely covered rent, let alone food and utilities. So I'd said yes, bought a simple black dress that didn't make me look like a discount store refugee, and showed up for my first event 3 weeks ago. The Whitmore Gallery was everything I'd dreamed of in my youth. White walls showcasing carefully curated pieces, perfect lighting that made every painting glow, hushed conversations where words like composition and brushwork were spoken with reverence. Walking through those rooms with a tray of champagne, I felt like a ghost visiting her own funeral. Ashley had been kind but distant during my first few shifts, acknowledging me with polite nods while she guided wealthy collectors through the exhibitions. She looked perfect in this environment. Sophisticated, educated, speaking the language of art with easy confidence. Everything I might have been if I'd made different choices. But tonight was special. Tonight was Ashley's first major auction as assistant curator, featuring emerging contemporary artists. The centerpiece was a landscape piece that Eleanor had called absolutely stunning during the preview. I'd been arranging champagne flutes for the early arrivals when I first saw it, displayed prominently in the main gallery with its own spotlight. The blood had rushed from my head so fast I'd gripped the serving table for support. It was my painting. Not similar to something I might have done, not reminiscent of my style. It was literally the landscape I'd painted of Miller's Creek in the summer of 2008, every brushstroke exactly as I remembered it. The creek winding through tall grass, the old oak tree with its gnarled branches, the afternoon light filtering through leaves I'd spent weeks perfecting. But the signature in the bottom right corner read, A. Thompson, in Ashley's careful script, painted over what I knew had been my own M. Hartwell. I'd stood there staring, telling myself I was wrong, mistaken. Maybe grief and age had scrambled my memories. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. But then I'd noticed the tiny flaw that proved it was mine. A spot near the creek where I'd accidentally mixed too much blue into the green and spent hours trying to fix it. The spot that looked like a mistake to everyone else, but meant hours of frustration to the artist who'd created it. My painting, my work, being sold with Ashley's name on it. The auction began at 8, and I served champagne with hands that barely trembled. On the outside, I was invisible Margaret Thompson in her simple black dress. On the inside, I was screaming. When the auctioneer called Lot 17, Ashley Thompson's remarkable debut piece, I'd positioned myself at the back of the room with a perfect view. The bidding started at $50,000. The price climbed steadily as hands shot up around the room, numbers being called that made my minimum wage existence feel even smaller. Ashley stood near the front, her face glowing with false modesty, as people congratulated her between bids. She was wearing the pearl necklace I'd given her for Christmas 2 years ago, back when I could still afford gifts that mattered. 100,000, 150, 200,000. David appeared beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching their future get brighter with every bid. Their future built on my stolen past. 300,000, 310, 330,000. Going once. That's when the champagne flute fell from my numb fingers, crystal exploding against the marble floor like a gunshot. Heads turned, Ashley's included, and for one terrible moment our eyes met across the crowded room. I saw recognition flash across her face. Not guilt, not shame. Recognition and calculation, like someone doing rapid math in their head. Sold $330,000 for this remarkable piece by Ashley Thompson. Applause filled the room while I knelt to pick up crystal shards with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. A security guard appeared beside me with a small broom, his voice kind but firm. "Don't worry about it, ma'am. Happens all the time at these events. Why don't you take a break?" I nodded and headed for the staff room, leaving behind the sound of celebration and the sight of Ashley accepting congratulations for selling my soul to strangers. In the tiny break room, I sat on a folding chair and stared at my hands. 68 years old, and I'd just watched my own daughter-in-law steal 16 years of my life in broad daylight. The worst part wasn't even the money, though $330,000 was more than I'd make in a decade of serving champagne. The worst part was how good she was at it. How naturally she accepted praise for work that had cost me months of early mornings and late nights, trying to capture light the way God intended it. But as I sat there surrounded by stacks of gallery programs and empty champagne boxes, something started burning in my chest that wasn't grief or shock. It was rage. Pure, clean rage that tasted like copper pennies and felt like electricity. Ashley Thompson had made a very expensive mistake tonight. She'd assumed that Margaret Thompson, the broken woman in the server's uniform, was the same person as Maggie Hartwell, the artist who'd once had the fire to dream impossible things. Time to remind her exactly who she'd decided to rob. I didn't go home after the auction. Instead, I drove to the all-night diner on 5th Street and ordered black coffee that tasted like regret while I tried to figure out how a painting I'd watched floodwater destroy 2 years ago had ended up in Ashley's art collection. The memory was crystal clear. I'd been down in the basement looking for David's old baseball cards when the pipe burst. Water everywhere, soaking through cardboard boxes and ruining everything I'd stored down there, including the wooden crate where I'd kept my finished paintings, the ones too painful to display but too precious to throw away. Or so I'd thought. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Pete Morrison, the contractor who'd done the flood cleanup. Pete had been Robert's bowling buddy back in the day, and he'd given me a deal on the restoration work. Maybe he'd remember something I'd forgotten. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Margaret? Jesus, what time is it?" "Pete, I need to ask you about the basement flood at my old house, the cleanup you did 2 years ago." "Margaret, it's after midnight. Can't this wait until morning?" "Did you save anything from those boxes? The ones that got water damaged?" A pause. "Some of it, yeah. Nothing you wanted to keep, you said. Told me to throw it all away." My heart started pounding. "Where did you throw it away?" "Well, that's the thing. My nephew Danny was helping with the cleanup, and he asked if he could take some of the art stuff. Said his girlfriend was into painting and might be able to restore some pieces." "You told me you didn't care what happened to it." "Danny Morrison. Ashley's maiden name was Morrison." "Pete, what's your nephew Danny's last name?" "Morrison. Why?" "And his girlfriend. What was her name?" "Ashley something. Pretty girl, real interested in art. Said she might be able to save some of your paintings." "Why are you asking about this now?" I hung up without answering and sat in the diner booth, my coffee going cold while pieces clicked into place like bullets loading into a gun. Ashley Morrison. She'd been Ashley Morrison when she started dating David 8 years ago, fresh out of art school with a degree and no talent. I'd met her at Sunday dinner, watched her flip through art books and nod along when David talked about my wasted potential. She'd been so interested in my artistic background, asking questions about techniques and periods. I'd thought she was being polite, trying to bond with her future mother-in-law. Instead, she'd been shopping. The flood had been 2 years ago, just before David and Ashley got married. Perfect timing to acquire a collection of original artwork and plenty of time to plan how to use it. I drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, my mind clearer than it had been in years. By the time I reached my apartment, I had a plan that would have made Robert proud. He'd always said I was too trusting for my own good, but he'd also taught me to keep detailed records of everything important. In my bedroom closet, behind winter clothes I rarely needed, was a shoebox containing the documentation of my artistic life. Photographs of paintings, sketches, even some old exhibition programs from my college years. Everything I'd need to prove that Ashley Thompson's remarkable debut piece had been painted by Margaret Hartwell in the summer of 2008. I spread the photos across my kitchen table like playing cards, looking for the one I remembered taking of the Millers Creek landscape. There it was, third photo in the stack, showing my painting on the easel in the garage studio. The date stamp on the back read July 15, 2008. The signature clearly visible was M. Hartwell. But I needed more than old photographs. I needed expert testimony, documentation, something that would hold up if this went legal. I made my first call at 9 in the morning to Dr. Patricia Wells, my old art professor at the community college. Patricia had kept in touch over the years, always encouraging me to get back to painting. She'd know how to verify artistic authenticity. "Margaret, what a lovely surprise. How are you doing?" "I'm doing better than I have in years, actually. Patricia, I need your help with something unusual. How would someone go about proving they painted a specific artwork?" "Well, there are several methods. Photographic documentation, signature analysis, even paint composition testing in extreme cases. Why do you ask?" I told her everything. Ashley, the stolen painting, the auction, even Pete Morrison's nephew Danny. Patricia listened without interrupting, making occasional sounds that suggested she was taking notes. "Margaret, this is serious fraud we're talking about. Art fraud, the kind that involves federal charges and prison time." "I know. That's why I need to do this right. I can help you document your work and provide expert testimony about your artistic style and techniques. I still have some of your pieces from class, and I kept photographs of student work from that period." "But Margaret, you need to understand what you're taking on. This isn't just about the money." "What do you mean? Your daughter-in-law didn't just steal one painting. If she was willing to do this once, she's probably done it before. How many other pieces from your collection did she acquire during that flood cleanup?" The question hit me like ice water. I'd painted dozens of pieces over the years, maybe hundreds if you counted all the studies and smaller works. Pete had said Danny's girlfriend was interested in art stuff, not just one painting. "Patricia, I need your help to find out what else she might have taken. Come to my office this afternoon. Bring everything you have. We're going to build a case that will make the art world sit up and take notice. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the photographs scattered across the surface. Each one represented hours of work, pieces of my soul I'd thought were lost forever. How many of them were sitting in Ashley's apartment right now, waiting for their moment in the spotlight? My phone buzzed with a text from David. Ashley told me you were working the auction last night. How exciting that you got to see her big debut. We're taking her to celebrate tonight. Dinner at Romano's at 7 if you want to join us. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I'd love to hear all about her artistic inspiration. Because if Ashley wanted to play the role of successful artist, she was going to discover that the woman she'd robbed had some very specific questions about where that inspiration came from. And Margaret Thompson, invisible server of champagne and forgotten mother-in-law, was done being polite. Romano's was the kind of restaurant where David took clients he wanted to impress, all white tablecloths and wine that cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a month. I arrived precisely at 7, wearing my best dress and the kind of smile that had gotten me through 40 years of marriage to a man who thought feelings were best kept to yourself. Ashley was radiant, holding court at a corner table, while David beamed beside her like a proud manager who'd discovered the next big thing. She'd changed from her gallery clothes into something soft and artistic, all flowing fabric and carefully arranged jewelry that whispered, successful creative type. Margaret! David stood to hug me, his cologne expensive and his enthusiasm genuine. I can't believe you got to see Ashley's triumph firsthand. What were the odds? Astronomical, I agreed, taking my seat across from them. Ashley, you must be thrilled. $330,000. Quite a return on investment. Her smile flickered for just a moment, too quick for David to notice. I've been working on that piece for months. It's wonderful when something you've poured your heart into finds the right home. Months, I repeated thoughtfully. Tell me about your process. Where did you find inspiration for such a detailed landscape? Ashley's eyes met mine across the candlelit table, and I saw her making calculations. How much did I know? How much did I suspect? How much could she afford to admit? I spend a lot of time outdoors, she said carefully. There's something about natural settings that speaks to me. The way light changes throughout the day, how water moves through landscapes. Miller's Creek is particularly beautiful in summer, I said, watching her face. This time the reaction wasn't quick enough to hide. Ashley's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and David glanced between us with the confused expression of someone who'd missed part of the conversation. I'm sorry, Ashley said. You're painting. It's Miller's Creek, isn't it? The old oak tree. The bend in the water where the current slows down. I used to take David there when he was little. Remember, honey? You loved catching minnows by that fallen log. David lit up with the memory. Oh my God, yes. We used to spend hours there. Ashley, I can't believe you painted our old fishing spot. When did you even see it? Ashley set down her fork with deliberate precision. I explore a lot of locations for inspiration. Sometimes I photograph places and work from memory later. That's fascinating, I said, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely interested. Because I could have sworn I saw some old photographs of that exact spot in my basement before the flood. Same angle, same lighting. What a coincidence that we'd both be drawn to capture it the same way. The silence stretched long enough for David to notice. He looked between Ashley and me with growing confusion. What flood? Margaret, what are you talking about? The basement flood 2 years ago. Remember? When that pipe burst and ruined all my old art supplies and paintings? Pete Morrison did the cleanup. Ashley had gone very still, her professional composure locked in place like armor. David mentioned you used to paint. Such a shame to lose your work that way. Oh, but it wasn't all lost, I said brightly. Pete's nephew Danny helped with the cleanup, and his girlfriend rescued some pieces. Thought she might be able to restore them. Isn't that wonderful? It's nice to know my old work found someone who appreciated it. David was frowning now, pieces clicking together in his engineer's mind. Ashley, your maiden name was Morrison. Is Danny your cousin? The waiter chose that moment to appear with our wine, giving Ashley time to construct her response. When he left, her smile was perfectly calibrated, apologetic but not guilty. I should have mentioned it earlier. Yes, Danny's my cousin. When he told me about the water-damaged paintings, I offered to look at them. Most were beyond saving, but a few had potential. I've been studying restoration techniques. So you restored Margaret's paintings? David asked, looking pleased at this family connection he'd somehow missed. I tried to save what I could, Ashley said. But restoration can be transformative. Sometimes you end up with something quite different from the original. I nodded thoughtfully. Different how? Well, water damage often obscures original signatures, makes it impossible to authenticate the original artist. And sometimes the restoration work is so extensive that it becomes a collaboration between the original artist and the restorer. The piece becomes something new. She was good, I had to admit, not just at lying, but at constructing lies that sounded reasonable to someone who didn't know better. David was nodding along, clearly impressed by his wife's artistic knowledge and generous spirit. That's amazing, Ashley. So Margaret's old paintings inspired your new work? In a way, she said, meeting my eyes directly. Sometimes the past provides a foundation for future creativity. I smiled and raised my wine glass. To future creativity built on solid foundations. We drank, and Ashley's hand was steady as glass, but I saw the message in her eyes, clear as painted words. I know that you know, and I'm not afraid. The rest of dinner passed with surface pleasantries, and David's excited chatter about Ashley's promising career. She'd been accepted into a group show next month, had 2 galleries interested in her work, possibly a solo exhibition in the spring, all built on the foundation of my stolen life's work. When we said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, Ashley hugged me with the affection of a dutiful daughter-in-law. Thank you for coming tonight, Margaret. It means so much to have family support. Family should always look out for each other, I replied, squeezing her back with equal warmth. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Ashley thought she'd won this round by admitting to restoration work while claiming the artistic transformation as her own. She'd constructed a story that protected her from accusations of outright theft while still allowing her to profit from my work. But she'd made 2 critical mistakes tonight. First, she'd underestimated how much I'd learned about strategic patience during 40 years of marriage to Robert Thompson. And second, she'd assumed that Margaret Thompson, grieving widow and occasional champagne server, was the same person as Maggie Hartwell, who'd once been fierce enough to believe she could paint the world exactly as she saw it. Tomorrow, I'd call Dr. Wells and share Ashley's interesting theory about restoration as artistic collaboration. Then I'd call Pete Morrison and ask some very specific questions about exactly which pieces Danny had taken from my collection. Because if Ashley wanted to play the game of artistic attribution and collaborative restoration, I was about to teach her some rules she'd never learned in art school. Starting with the most important one, always know exactly who you're stealing from. Dr. Patricia Wells's office at the community college was exactly as I remembered it from my continuing education classes 15 years ago. Paintings covered every available wall space, some professional pieces, but mostly student work that showed promise. She'd always believed in displaying potential alongside achievement. Margaret, you look different, she said, studying me over her reading glasses. Determined? I like it. I spread my documentation across her desk. Photographs, sketches, even the detailed notes I'd kept about paint colors and techniques for each piece. 40 years of marriage to an accountant had trained me to document everything. Tell me about this restoration theory Ashley presented, Patricia said, reviewing the photographs. She claimed water damage made original signatures unreadable, and that extensive restoration work creates a collaboration between original artist and restorer, essentially arguing that the restored piece becomes a new work of art. Patricia snorted. That's complete nonsense from a legal standpoint. Restoration work, no matter how extensive, doesn't transfer artistic ownership. If I restore a damaged Monet, I don't suddenly become co-creator of a Monet. The original artist remains the original artist. She pulled out a magnifying glass and examined the photograph of my Miller's Creek painting. Besides, this wasn't restoration work. This was forgery. Look at this signature analysis. She pointed to where Ashley's A. Thompson's signature appeared over my original M. Hartwell. Under magnification, you could see the different paint layers. See how the signature sits on top of the painting surface instead of being integrated into the final layer. Your original signature was painted over, not restored. That's deliberate fraud. Not artistic collaboration. What would hold up in court? Everything you've brought me, plus I can provide expert testimony about your artistic style and techniques. But Margaret, we need more evidence of the scope of this fraud. How many pieces are we talking about? I handed her the list I'd compiled after calling Pete Morrison that morning. 23 paintings, ranging from small studies to major works like the Miller's Creek landscape. Pete remembered because Danny had borrowed his truck twice to transport everything. My God, Patricia breathed. If she's selling these at auction prices similar to the Miller's Creek piece, we're talking about potential fraud worth millions of dollars. There's something else, I said, pulling out my phone. I did some research on Ashley's artistic career this morning. I'd spent hours online, tracing Ashley Thompson's professional history. Art school graduate with mediocre grades, no gallery representation before marrying David, no sales or exhibitions in her own name until 18 months ago. Then suddenly, a meteoric rise with sophisticated landscape work that garnered immediate critical attention. Her artistic style supposedly matured dramatically right around the time of my basement flood, I continued. Before that, her work was described as promising but lacking technical sophistication. Patricia was taking notes rapidly. We need to see her other pieces, the ones she's claimed as original work. I have an idea about that. Ashley mentioned she's in a group show next month at the Riverside Gallery. I could attend the opening. Better than that? Patricia said, her eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found an intellectual puzzle worth solving. I know the curator at Riverside. Helen Martinez and I went to graduate school together. She'd be very interested in questions of artistic authenticity, especially if there's fraud involved. She reached for her phone. Helen, it's Patricia Wells. I need your help with something that might be right up your alley. How familiar are you with Ashley Thompson's work? I listened to one side of a conversation that grew increasingly interesting. Helen Martinez, apparently, had some concerns about Ashley Thompson's rapid artistic development. The sophistication of technique didn't match the timeline of her supposed artistic education. There had been whispers in the art community about the authenticity of her work. Helen wants to meet with you, Patricia said after hanging up. Tomorrow afternoon at 2. She's been building her own file on Ashley Thompson, and your documentation might be exactly what she needs. Driving home, I felt the satisfaction of pieces falling into place. Ashley had built her career on my stolen work, but she'd gotten greedy. Instead of selling 1 or 2 pieces quietly and building a modest reputation, she'd created a body of work too sophisticated for her supposed artistic background. That evening, David called with his usual weekly check-in. His voice was excited, full of news about Ashley's expanding opportunities. Mom, you won't believe this. Ashley just got offered a solo exhibition at the Whitmore Gallery in 6 months. Eleanor Price thinks she could be the next major landscape artist. We're talking about a 20-piece show with sale prices starting at $50,000. 20 pieces. The exact number I'd estimated Ashley had stolen from my collection. That's wonderful, dear. Ashley must be thrilled about the opportunity to display her life's work. She's been working non-stop, preparing new pieces for the show. I barely see her anymore. She's completely focused on making this exhibition perfect. I bet she was. Creating new, original works from stolen paintings probably took considerable time and effort. David, has Ashley ever talked about her artistic influences, where she draws inspiration from? You know, it's interesting you ask. She's mentioned studying historical landscape techniques, looking at how earlier artists captured natural light and water movement. She says, understanding the masters helps her develop her own voice. Understanding the masters, or understanding how to paint over their signatures and claim their work as her own. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about justice. For 16 years, I'd believed my artistic life was finished. Not just ended, but erased, literally washed away in a basement flood that seemed like final proof that my creative dreams had been foolish all along. But my work hadn't been destroyed. It had been stolen. Its value finally recognized by someone who understood its worth better than I'd understood it myself. Ashley Thompson had built a career on the foundation of my artistic ability, and now she was planning a major exhibition to cement her reputation as a talented landscape artist. She'd made one crucial miscalculation, though. She'd assumed that Margaret Thompson, invisible serving woman in her simple black dress, would never discover what had been taken from her. And even if she did discover it, she'd never have the courage or knowledge to fight back. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Helen Martinez and add my documentation to whatever file she was building. Then I'd attend Ashley's group show opening and see exactly how many of my stolen pieces were being displayed under her name. Because Ashley Thompson was about to learn that some collaborations are less voluntary than others, and some restorations involve giving work back to its rightful creator. Helen Martinez met me at a coffee shop near the Riverside Gallery, carrying a leather portfolio that looked serious enough to contain legal documents. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of focused intensity that made her seem like someone who didn't waste time on small talk. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for meeting with me. Patricia Wells showed me your documentation, and frankly, it confirms suspicions I've had about Ashley Thompson's work for months." She opened her portfolio and spread out photographs of Ashley's pieces from various exhibitions over the past year. 8 paintings total, all landscapes, all showing a level of technical sophistication that Helen found suspicious. "Look at this progression," she said, pointing to dates and venues. 18 months ago, Ashley Thompson was a recent art school graduate with basic skills. Then suddenly, she produces work like this. The photographs showed paintings I recognized, though Ashley had done enough alteration work that casual observers might not notice. My summer meadow study had become her wildflower reverie. My winter stream scene was now titled Frozen Contemplation. "The technical jump is impossible," Helen continued. "You don't go from student-level work to this kind of mastery in 18 months. Not without years of intensive study or access to work by master artists. Or access to finished paintings you can claim as your own," I said quietly. "Exactly. Patricia explained your flood situation and the connection through Ashley's cousin. Mrs. Thompson, I believe Ashley has been systematically passing off your work as her own, probably for over a year." Helen pulled out another set of photographs, these showing detailed shots of signatures and brushwork. "I've been documenting every piece of hers I could access. Look at these signature overlays." Under close examination, each painting showed the same pattern. Original signatures painted over with Ashley's careful script, just like the Miller's Creek landscape that had sold for $330,000. "This is systematic art fraud," Helen said firmly, "and next week's group show will give us the opportunity to document it properly. What do you need from me?" "I need you to attend the opening as my guest. Bring your documentation and be prepared to identify your original work. I'll have a photographer there to document everything we find." She handed me a business card. "There's something else you should know. I've been in contact with the FBI's art crime team. They've been investigating a rise in art fraud cases involving emerging artists, and Ashley Thompson's rapid success fits their pattern." FBI. The weight of what Ashley had done was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a family dispute about old paintings. This was federal crime. "Helen, what happens to David? My son. He has no idea what Ashley has been doing. If he's genuinely uninvolved, he should be fine legally. But Mrs. Thompson, this is going to destroy their marriage."